So greetings, my friends. This is my first time doing this, so pardon me if I make any mistakes, if there's a possibility of me making a mistake doing this. But my name's Lauren, and I really like reading. I don't really have anyone to read with, though. I'm trying to even freaking convince my mom to buy a book at the same time as I do to read with and talk about it. So decided to kind of just share what I'm reading right now. Maybe have some people talk about it in the little comment thing, because I love asking questions. If you know me, I will ask too many and I will bother the heck out of you. But I just kind of wanted to read a little book and just see what people think and talk about the same thing. Thought it would be interesting. I like doing that. But I guess I'll introduce the book now after I introduce him. This is my dog, Ralph. He may or may not be in the video the whole time. Or he may be against the door. You really can't see him. He's quite black. And quite asleep. Anyway, so jumping right into it, I am currently reading Fingerprints of the Gods. It's by Hancock. And it's a fantastic book so far. I'm absolutely loving it. It's about the evidence of the Earth's lost civilization, and it pretty much is starting off. I apologize, but I'm kind of really just going to jump into where I am right now, chapter 4. So if you have any possibility of maybe covering the first what's it, 32 pages or so, or if you guys really want me to request to start the first part, but I'm just going to jump into where I start right now, which is Flight of the Condor. But to kind of really give you a little brief summary of what started the book out is it's talking about the maps, and it's talking about basically it started with the Piri Reis, which is an ancient map drawn up in 1512, and it showed some pretty interesting things like Antarctica and some type of new terrain, like mountainous terrain that you could see in the pictures of the map. And if you consider the fact that it's 1513 and Antarctica hadn't yet been discovered yet, it hadn't been discovered until much, much later, you would wonder how he had the ability to draw something up. However, he mentioned, Piri Reis, the individual who had created the map, had mentioned that he had drawn up his map from prior sources. So there's about 20 different maps that kind of show different and very accurate versions of Antarctica, way before there was a possibility for them being able to even, know what it was or where it was or anything about it. So the question is, where did they get this information? And, how would one draw up a map that is so incredibly accurate that, that they could be able to do something as such? Because, knowing us in our society now, me just speaking as an individual before, I've even considered like, back in ancient civilization, there's no way they could do something like skyscrapers or something like that. But then again, you look at, the Egyptian pyramids, and it's amazing what they do, and you consider the fact that we might not be able to do it now. So it's not too much to put past these people, in ancient times and what they were able to do, because we certainly may have had some things handed down to us and we might not even know it. So jumping into chapter 4, Flight of the Condor, I shall get started. So, I'm in southern Peru, flying over the Nazca lines. Below me, after the whale and the monkey, the hummingbird comes into the view, flutters and enfolds her wings, stretches toward her delicate beak toward some imaginary flower. Then we turn hard right, pursued by our own tiny shadow as we cross the bleak scar of the Pan American Highway and follow a trajectory that brings us over the fabulous snake-neckled Alcatraz, a heron 900 feet long conceived in the mind of a master geometer. We circle around, cross the highway for a second time, pass an astonishing arrangement of fish and triangles laid out beside a pelican, turn left and find ourselves floating over the sublime image of a giant condor with feathers extended in stylized flight. Just as I try to catch my breath, another condor, almost close enough to touch, materializes out of nowhere, a real condor this time, haughty as a fallen angel riding a thermal back to heaven. My pilot gasps and tries to follow him. For a moment, I catch a glimpse of a bright, dispassionate eye that seems to weigh us up and find us wanting. Then, like a vision from some ancient myth, the creature banks and glides contemptuously backwards into the sun, leaving our single-engine Cessna floundering in the lower air. Below us now, there's a pair of parallel lines almost 2 miles long. Arrow straight all the way to a vanishing point. And there, off to the right, a series of abstract shapes on a scale so vast and yet so precisely executed that it seems inconceivable they may have been the work of men. The people around here say that they were not the work of men, but of demigods, the Virococas, who also left their fingerprints elsewhere in the Andean region many thousands of years ago. The riddle of the lines. The Nazca Plateau in southern Peru is a desolate place, sere and unwelcoming, barren and profitless. Human populations have never concentrated here, nor will they do so in the future. The surface of the moon seems hardly less hospitable. If you happen to be an artist with grand designs, however, these high and daunting plains look like a very promising canvas, with 200 square miles of uninterrupted tableland and certainty that your masterwork won't be carried away on the desert breeze or covered by drifting sand. It's true that high winds do blow here, but by a happy accident of physics, they are robbed of the sting at ground level. The pebbles that litter the pampa absorb and retain the sun's heat, throwing up a protective force field of warm air. In addition, the soil contains enough gypsum to glue small stones to the subsurface, an adhesive regularly renewed by the moistening effect of early morning dews. Once things are drawn here, therefore, they tend to stay drawn. There's hardly any rain. Indeed, with less than half an hour of miserly drizzle every decade, Nazca is among the driest place on earth. If you're an artist, therefore, if you have something grand and important to express, and if you want it to be visible forever, these strange and lonely flatlands could look like the answer to your prayers. Experts have announced upon the antiquity of Nazca, basing their opinions on fragments of pottery found embedded in the lines and on radiocarbon results from various organic remains unearthed here. The dates conjectured range from 350 BC and AD 600. Realistically, they tell us nothing about the age of lines themselves, which are inherently as undateable as the stones cleared to make them. All we can say for sure is that the most recent are at least 1,400 years old, but it's theoretically possible that they could be far more ancient than that, for the simple reason that the artifacts from which dates are derived could have been brought to Nazca by later peoples. The majority of the designs are spread out across a clearly defined area of southern Peru, bounded by the Rio Ingenio to the north and the Rio Nazca to the south, a roughly square canvas of dun-colored desert with 46 kilometers of the Pan American Highway running obliquely through it from the top center to the bottom right. Here, scattered apparently at random, are literally hundreds of different figures. Some depict animals and birds, a total of 18 different birds, but far more take the form of geometrical devices in the form of trapezoids, rectangles, triangles, and straight lines. Viewed from above, these latter resemble to the modern eye a jumble of runways, as though some megalomaniac civil engineer had been licensed to act out his most flamboyant fantasies of airfield design. It therefore comes as no surprise, since humans are not supposed to have been able to fly until the beginning of the 20th century, that the Nazca lines have been identified by a number of observers as landing strips for alien spaceships. This is a seductive notion, but Nazca is perhaps not the best place to seek evidence for it. For example, it is difficult to understand why extraterrestrial advanced enough to have crossed hundreds of light years of interstellar space should have needed landing strips at all. Surely such beings would have mastered the technology of setting their flying saucers down vertically. Huh. Besides, there is no question that the Nazca lines have ever been used as runways by flying saucers or anything else, although some of them look like that from above. Viewed at ground level, they are little more than grazes of surface made by scraping away thousands of tons of black volcanic pebbles to expose the desert's paler base yellow sand and clay. None of the cleared areas is more than a few inches deep, and all are much too soft to have permitted the landing of wheeled flying vehicles. The German mathematician Maria Riesch, who devoted half a century to the study of lines, was only being logical when she dismissed the extraterrestrial theory with a single pithy sentence a few years ago. I'm afraid the spacemen would have gotten stuck. If not the runways for the chariots of alien gods, therefore, what else might the Nazca lines be? The truth is, no one knows their purpose, just as no one really knows their age. They are a genuine mystery of the past. And the closer you look at them, the more baffling they become. It's clear, for example, that the animals and birds antedate the geometry of the runways because many of the trapezoids, rectangles, and straight lines bisect and thus partially obliterate the more complex figures. The obvious deduction is that the final artwork of the desert as we view it today must have been produced in two phases. Moreover, though it seems contrary to the normal laws of technical progress, we must concede that the earlier of the two phases was more advanced. The execution of the zoomorphic figures called for far higher level of skills and technology than the etching of the straight lines. But how widely separated in time were the earlier and later artists? Scholars do not address themselves to these questions. Instead, they lump both cultures together as the Nazcans and depict them as primitive tribesmen who unaccountably developed sophisticated techniques of artistic self-expression and then vanished from the Peruvian scene many hundreds of years before the appearance of their better-known successors, the Incas. How sophisticated were these Nazcan primitives? What kind of knowledge must they have possessed to inscribe their gigantic signatures on the plateau? It seems for a start that they were pretty good observational astronomers. At least according to Dr. Phyllis Pitluga, an astronomer with the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. After making an intensive computer-aided study of stellar alignments of Nazca, she has concluded that the famous spider figure was devised as a terrestrial diagram of the giant constellation of Orion, and that the arrow straight lines linked to the figure appear to have been set out to track through the ages of changing declinations of the three stars of Orion's belt. The real significance of Dr. Pitluga's discovery will become apparent in the due course. Meanwhile, let us note that the Nazca spider also accurately depicts a member of a known spider genus, Rickenuli. This, as it happens, is one of the rarest spider genera in the world. So rare, indeed, that it's only been found in remote and inaccessible parts of the Amazon rainforest. How did the supposedly primitive Nazcan artists travel so far from their homeland, crossing the formidable barrier of the Andes to obtain a specimen? More to the point, why should they have wanted to do such a thing, and how are they able to duplicate minute details of the Rickenuli's anatomy normally visible only under a microscope, notably the reproductive organ position on the end of the extended right leg? Such mysteries multiply at Nazca, and none of the designs, except perhaps the condor, seem quite at home here. The whale and the monkey are, after all, as out of place in this desert environment as the Amazonian spider. A curious figure of a man, his right arm raised as though it's greeting, heavy boots on his feet, and round eyes staring owlishly forward, cannot be said to belong to any known era or culture. And other drawings depicting the human form are equally peculiar. Their heads enclosed in halos of radiance, they do indeed look like visitors from another planet. Their sheer size is equally noteworthy and bizarre. The hummingbird is 165 feet long, the spider 150 feet long, the condor stretches nearly 400 feet from the beak to the tail feathers, as does the pelican. And a lizard, whose tail is now divided by the Pan American Highway, is 617 feet in length. Almost every design is executed on the same cyclopean scale and in the same difficult manner by the careful contouring of a single continuous line. Similar attention to detail is to be found in the geometrical devices. Some of these take the form of straight lines more than 5 miles long, marching like Roman roads across the desert, dropping into dried-out riverbeds, surmounting rocky outcrops, and never once deviating from true. This kind of precision is hard, but not impossible, to explain in conventional common-sense terms. More puzzling by far are the zoomorphic figures. How could they have been so perfectly made when, without aircraft, their creators could not have checked the progress of their work by viewing it from its proper perspective? None of the designs is small enough to have been seen from ground level, where they appear merely as a series of shapeless ruts in the desert. They show their true form only when seen from the altitude of several hundred feet. There is no elevation nearby that provides such a vantage point. Line makers, map makers. I'm flying over the lines, trying to make sense of it all. My pilot, Rodolfo Arias, lately of the Peruvian Air Force. After a career in jet fighters, he finds the little Cessna slow and uninspiring and treats it like a taxi with wings. Once already, we've been back to the airstrip at Nazca to remove a window so that my partner Santha can point our cameras vertically down at the alluring glyphs. Now we're experimenting with the view from different altitudes. At a couple of hundred feet above the plain Risinuli, the Amazonian spider looks like he's going to rear up and snatch us in his jaws. At 500 feet, we can see several of the figures at once: a dog, a tree, a weird pair of hands, the condor, and some of the triangles and trapezoids. When we ascend to 1,500 feet, the zoomorphs hit their predominant are revealed merely as small scattered units surrounded by an astonishing scribble of vast geometric forms. These forms now look like runways and more like pathways made by giants, pathways that crisscross the plateau in what seems at first a bewildering variety of shapes, angles, and sizes. As the ground continues to recede, however, and as the widening perspective of the lines permits more of an eagle's eye view, I begin to wonder whether there might not after all be some method to the cuneiform slashes and scratches spread out below me. I am reminded of an observation made by Maria Riesch, the mathematician who has lived at Nazca and studied the line since 1946. In her view, the geometric drawings give the impression of a cipher script in which the same words are sometimes written in huge letters, at another time in minute characters. There are line arrangements which appear in a great variety of size categories together with very similar shapes. All the drawings are composed of a certain number of basic elements. As the Cessna bumps and heaves across the heavens, I also remember it is no accident that the Nazca lines were only properly identified in the 20th century after the era of flight had begun. In the late 16th century, a magistrate named Luis de Monzon was the first Spanish traveler to bring back eyewitness reports concerning these mysterious marks on the desert, and to collect the strange local traditions that link them to the Viracocas. However, until commercial airlines began to operate regularly between Lima and Arequipa in the 1930s, no one seems to have grasped that the largest piece of graphic art in the world lay here in southern Peru. It was the development of aviation that made the difference, giving men and women the godlike ability to take to the skies and see the beautiful and puzzling things that had to have been hidden from them. Rodolfo is steering the Cesena in in a gentle circle over the figure of the monkey, a big monkey tied in a riddle of geometric forms. It's not easy to describe the eerie, hypnotic feeling this design gives me. It's very complicated and absorbing to look at, and slightly sinister in an abstract, indefinable way. The monkey's body is defined by a continuous unbroken line, and without ever being interrupted, this same line winds up stairs, over pyramids, into a series of zigzags through a spiral labyrinth, the tail, and then back around a number of star-like hairpin bends. It would be a real tour de force of draughtsmanship and artistic skill on a sheet of notepaper, but this is the Nazca Desert, where they do things on a grand scale. And the monkey is at least 400 feet long and 300 feet wide. Were the line makers map makers too? And why were they called the Viracocas? So that concluded chapter 4. So that was definitely a lot different than the previous chapter that I had read. The first 3 chapters were about Antarctica and how the ancient map makers have been able to do that, but this really just jumped into something completely different. I really don't actually know too much about this the stuff over the Nazca Plateau. So if you guys actually have any interesting things to tell me about it or links to where I can go to check out some more information, I definitely would like to learn some more. But yeah, that's a little interesting. But the next chapter, chapter 5, is going to be the Inca Trail to the Past. So I will begin that. Chapter 5, the Inca Trail to the Past. No artifacts or monuments, no cities or temples have endured in recognizable form for longer than the most resilient religious traditions. Whether expressed in the pyramid texts of ancient Egypt or the Hebrew Bible or the Vedas, such traditions are among the most imperishable of all human creations. They are vehicles of knowledge voyaging through time. The last custodians of the ancient religious heritage of Peru were the Incas, whose beliefs of idolatry were extirpated and whose treasures were ransacked during the 30 terrible years that followed the Spanish conquest, 1532 AD. However, a number of early Spanish travelers made sincere efforts to document Inca traditions before they were entirely forgotten. Though little attention was paid at the time, some of these traditions speak strikingly of a great civilization that was believed to have existed in Peru many thousands of years earlier. Powerful memories were preserved of this civilization, said to have been founded by the Viracocas, the same mysterious beings credited with making of the Nazca lines. Interesting. Foam of the sea. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, the Inca Empire extended along the Pacific coast and the Andean highlands of South America from the northern border of modern Ecuador through the whole of Peru and as far as south as the Mal River in central Chile. Connecting the far-flung corners of this empire was a vast and sophisticated road system. 2 parallel north-south highways, for example, one running for 3,600 kilometers along the coast and other for a similar distance through the Andes. Both these great thoroughfares were paved and connected by frequent links. In addition, they exhibited an interesting range of design and engineering features, such as the suspension bridges and tunnels cut through a solid rock. They were clearly the work of an evolved, disciplined, and ambitious society. Ironically, they played a significant part in its downfall, the Spanish forces, led by Francisco Pizarro, used them to great effect to speed up their ruthless advance into the Inca heartland. The capital of the Inca Empire was the city of Cuzco, a name meaning the earth's navel in the local Quechua language. According to legend, it was established by Manco Capac and Mama Aclo, two children of the sun. Here, though the Incas worshipped the sun god, whom they knew as Inti, quite another deity was venerated as the most holy of all. This was the Viracocha, whose namesakes were said to have made the Nazca lines and whose own name meant foam of the sea. No doubt it is coincidence that the Greek goddess Aphrodite, who was born of the sea, receives her name because of the foam, Aphros, out of which she was formed. Besides, Viracocha was always depicted uncompromisingly as a male by the people of the Andes. That much about him is known for certain. No historian, however, is able to say how ancient was the cult of this deity before the Spanish arrived to put a stop to it. This is because the cult seemed always to have been around. Indeed, long before the Incas incorporated him into the cosmogony and built a magnificent temple for him at Cuzco. The evidence suggests that the high god Viracocha had been worshipped by all the civilizations that had ever existed in the long history of Peru. Citadel of Viracocha. After a few days after leaving Nazca, Santa and I arrived in Cuzco and made our way to the site of Coricancha, the great temple dedicated to the Viracocha in the pre-Columbian era. The Coricancha was, of course, long gone, or to be more exact, it was not so much gone as buried beneath layers of later architecture. The Spanish had kept its superb Inca foundations and the lower parts of its fabulously strong walls and had erected their own grandiose colonial cathedral on top. Walking the front entrance of this cathedral, I remembered that the Inca temple had once stood here had been covered with more than 700 sheets of pure gold, each weighing around 2 kilograms, and that its spacious courtyards had been planted in the fields of replica corn, also fashioned out of gold. I could not help but be reminded of Solomon's temple in far-off Jerusalem, also reputed to have been adorned with sheets of gold and marvelous orchid of golden trees. Earthquakes in 1650 and again in 1950 had largely demolished the Spanish Cathedral of Santo Domingo, which stood on the site of the Temple of Viracocha, and it's been necessary to rebuild it on both occasions. Its Inca foundations and lower walls survived these natural disasters intact, thanks to the characteristic design which made the use of an elegant system of interlocking polygonal blocks. These blocks and the general layout of the place were almost all that was now left of the original structure, apart from the octagonal gray stone platform at the center of the vast rectangular courtyard, which had once been covered by with 55 kilograms of solid gold. On either side of the courtyard were antechambers, also from the Inca temple, with refined architectural features such as walls that tapered upwards and beautifully carved niches hewn out of the single pieces of granite. We took a walk around the narrow cobbled streets of Cuzco. Looking around, I realized it was not just a cathedral and reflected Spanish imposition on top of an earlier culture. The whole town was slightly schizophrenic, spacious, balconied, pastel-shaded colonial homes and palaces towered above me, but almost all of them stood on Inca foundations or incorporated complete Inca structures of the same beautiful polygonal architecture used in the Coricancha. In one alleyway, known as Hatuna Rumi Yak, I paused to examine an intricate jigsaw puzzle of a wall made of countless dry stone blocks all perfectly fitted together, all of different sizes and shapes, interlocking in a bewildering array of angles. The carving of the individual blocks and their arrangement into so complicated a structure could have only been achieved by a master craftsman possessed of a very high level of skills, with untold centuries of architectural experimentation behind them. On one block, I counted 12 angles and sides in a single plane, and I could not slip even the edge of a piece of the paper, of thin paper, into the joints that connected it from the surrounding blocks. The bearded stranger. It seemed that in the early 16th century, before the Spanish arrived to demolish Peruvian culture in earnest, an idol of Viracocha had stood in the Holy of Holies of the Coricancha. According to its contemporary text, the Relación Anomia de los Costumbres Antiguas de los Naturales de Peru, this idol took the form of a marble statue of the god, a statue described as to the hair, complexion, features, raiment, and sandals, just as painters represent the Apostle St. Bartholomew. Other accounts of Viracocha likened his appearance to that of St. Thomas. I examined a number of illustrated Acestial manuscripts in which these two saints appear. Both were routinely depicted as lean, bearded white men past middle age, wearing sandals and dressed in long, flowing cloaks. As we shall see, the record confirmed this was exactly the appearance ascribed to the Viracocha by those who worshipped him. Whoever he was, therefore, he could have not been an American Indian. They are relatively dark-skinned people with sparse facial hair. Viracocha's bushy beard and pale complexion made him sound like a Caucasian. Back in the 16th century, the Incas had thought so too. Indeed, their legends and religious beliefs made them so certain of his physical type that they initially mistook the white and bearded Spaniards who arrived on their shores for the returning Viracocha and his demigods, an event long prophesied, and which Viracocha was said in all the legends to have promised. This happy coincidence gave Pizarro's conquistadors the decisive strategic and psychological edge that they needed to overcome the numerically superior Inca forces in the battles that followed. Who had provided the model for the Viracochas? And that ends chapter 5. So, the next chapter is going to be chapter 6, and it's titled, He Came in a Time of Chaos. And, looks like it's going on into some more stuff about the Viracocha and the Spaniards and such. So I will continue that in the next video. If you guys have some questions to ask or actually want to just kind of jump into a little bit of a conversation, I'd be definitely interested to hear what you guys are thinking about it. But I will cut you guys loose. I know you guys want to go back to whatever you guys are doing, but thank you for tuning in. If you guys want to check me out on Instagram, it's really my only social media that I really even have. You can find me at SweetGreenEyes3. Yes, that is my AIM name back from throwback time. But yeah, that's the media, or that's the social media that I have. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll be back soon with the next chapter of Fingerprints of the Gods, Chapter 6. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friends. Bye.